Okay.
Hopefully the sound of the recording doesn't mean that everybody's going to drop off, but I do notice that some people are still joining. I think first and foremost, thank you so much for everybody that's spending the time and um, joining us today. This is an informational session. This is an introductory session to some, to the team, and to the process that we've been working hard on behind the scenes. So a number of thank yous. I'm going to try to keep my part of it very short, but thank you everybody to joining. It's very important to us, and this is we're 30 days now away from a major milestone in the community as it relates to hearing our voices and sharing our stories with those that need to hear it, and those that may have some authority to make decisions that help us in now and in the future. So, for those that don't know me or can't see my name, it's Jason Child. I'm joined here in studio, if you will, with my daughter Olive, who is an Alexander disease patient. She was diagnosed in 2015, at the or 2014, pardon me, at the age of 5, and currently 16. So, um, I'm speaking to you. I get I guess the privilege or pleasure of introducing Sarah and James in a moment, but just some housekeeping items on behalf of AxD. And on behalf of Jenny Pearson, who is not available to be speaking today, but will be our host at the with the FDA and with the PFDD meeting that we're here to talk about today. Um, I do want to make sure everybody's aware as we go through some of the information leading up to this PFDD that we're the entire board of NDXD is available to assist and try to get information out and try to share information. If you take anything, just know that you can reach out by email, through our website, etc. There's many ways, and we encourage you. We won't always answer immediately, but we do make a concerted effort to get everybody the information they need. We can move forward. This webinar or this information session will be recorded. It will be available on the website. We will also be circulating plenty of communications between now and then through the email distribution list, through our social media. So don't feel like you're being bombarded. It's just to ensure that everybody has the appropriate links. If we want to move forward, those of you who are familiar with END AXD or End Alexander disease and our organization, doing everything we possibly can to promote research, to encourage new ideas, to support families, to help patients, to create and bring a community together. This one milestone of the PFDD, this is one thing we're working on. We believe it's important. It's not the be all and end all, but it is an opportunity finally for the community to be heard and tell their story and hopefully have say it to the people that may be able to do something with the information. Um, the ELPFDD or the PFDD or the FDA meeting or whatever we want to call it, it is externally. The acronym is there written in front of you. Patient-focused drug development. Um, I knew nothing about this a year ago. I didn't even know it existed. Through my work in kind of behind the scenes, I've learned that it really is an opportunity to get on the record and share stories so that anybody making decisions or anybody needing to learn more about the disease and how it impacts us day to day and how different it can be and how tragic it can be, and all those things that we see day to day and we take for granted, it truly is it truly is a great idea, and it's a very, very important meeting in terms of helping to shape the approval process and shape the attention that we get. I mean, it is effectively we're handing out microphones and saying, everybody yell your story into this microphone, because if we don't, people might not listen to us and they might not hear us, more importantly. So it is selfishly, we're preparing it, and we are telling our stories, and we are going to take it to the people that we think need to listen to it, and it's going to be in the public record for everybody to see, so that we can point to it today, in the future, and forever. So circle the date on your calendar. 30 days from now, December the 5th, from 10 to 3. There will be tons of communication in terms of accessing it, how to share the link, how to add the link, how to view it, how to do anything around that. Just block off that day, and please reach out if you have any concerns about how to join. I think we can move into the specifics. Again, I've covered most of this, but everybody has a different opportunity to say something. We have, for those on the call that are participating, thank you for that. For those that are on the call curious about what's happening, and you may have heard something, we are working with many members of the community to provide their stories, be it written, be it dial-in, be it pre-recorded, or be it live call-ins. And we encourage you the same thing. The call for participation is not stopping, it's actually starting. If we could have 500 people log into this meeting, it would be tremendous. The more, the better. And especially if it's anybody that's impacted by this tragic disease, the more the merrier. It's not just one per family or one per state. It's bring everybody. And you don't have to be there from 10 to 3. You can be there from 10 to 1 or 10 to 2 or 1 to 3. It doesn't matter. Join when you can, participate where you can and where you feel comfortable. That is my final call for participation. I think we've covered this as well. And again, this is more for those that need to log in after and watch the recording. You can read this. We're 30 days away, and it's actually happening. I want to turn this over now to the two other faces you can see on the screen, both James Valentine and Sarah Wicks. They are wonderful people that we have had the pleasure of dealing with from Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara, or HPM, as you might see in the materials. And they're experts in drug development and the FDA review and the process. James has worked the last 17 years. Really as a champion for the patient voice as part of the regulatory process. James previously worked at the FDA, where he was a patient liaison, helping to incorporate the patient voice into medical product review across the FDA's various medical product centers and review divisions. There he helped to develop and launch the PFDD initiative. So we as a community are privileged and have the pleasure of having him help us navigate this ship through this process. Sarah is a regulatory attorney who has spent most of her career helping drug developers and patient organizations, exactly like ours, navigate this complex regulatory issue and all the issues that emerge during the drug development process. Sarah is very passionate about ensuring that the patient voice is incorporated through the drug development process, and I can tell you she's been holding mine, Jenny's, and everybody's hand through this process very patiently. So James, Sarah, and the HPM team have worked. This isn't their first time. They've worked with many organizations through this process to ensure that their voices were heard by decision makers. They work with and on behalf of our community right now, and relevant to our upcoming meeting. They've helped plan and moderate, I think, over 70 of these various meetings in recent and current history now. So we're in good hands with James and Sarah. I'll turn it over to you both and sit back and listen. But I do encourage anybody with questions to either put them in the chat via the Zoom program, or send an email after if you're more comfortable doing that. But do reach out. We do want to hear your voice. Thank you, Sarah and James.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jason, for the introduction. And wow, it's great to be here late afternoon, at least where we are in Washington, D.C., to be with all of you here in the Alexander disease community. As Jason said, this is a very, very exciting opportunity for this community to, essentially spend most of a day with, the FDA, the regulators who will be have already been involved in helping product developers navigate development, but will also be involved in assessing, the benefits and risks of drugs to determine whether they ultimately get approved. And so, the background that Sarah and I want to share with you today is kind of to, help you both feel prepared for participating in this PFDD meeting, but also help you understand, what your participation looks like. And, if you're uncertain about whether you want to participate, hopefully by the end of this, you'll see, the value and importance of having your voice heard. Go to the next slide. So our discussion, today, we kind of want to start with some of the fundamentals. This might be, a little bit of a, kind of refresher for some of you, but we want to make sure everyone in the community has some of the basic understanding of the drug development process and where FDA fits into that process. Because if we're talking to FDA, we want to know the state, our audience, where they can have influence, maybe where they don't. And so we'll cover some of that. But then we'll get into helping you understand where your voice as the patient community, as caregivers and individuals living with Alexander disease fit into that process, specifically what that looks like in this meeting format, this so-called ELPFD. And then we'll get really into the nitty-gritty at the end of what does the meeting look like, how do you participate, what should you expect. So we've got a lot to cover, but I promise we'll leave time at the end to answer your questions. So if you have questions as we go, just drop them into chat, and we'll make sure to spend some time going through those with you as well. Next slide. So I'm going to give you some start here. I'll take the first part of this and talk some about this background about how drugs are developed. And I want to caveat it before we start out because I'm purposefully walking through how this traditionally works in a rare or really ultra rare disease like Alexander disease. This process can be very condensed and actually has been condensed in development, the leading development program, in Alexander disease. But it's still important to understand the different pieces of this process because even if it's condensed, you still have to generate this information. This is the information that FDA will be evaluating. So if we think about, drug development, we are first talking about research. And when we're talking about research and drug development, we're doing drug discovery. We're looking and doing research into a disease to know where in the disease process we might be able to intervene. Obviously, the closer to the root cause of the disease that we can intervene, the better. It has the best chance of impacting a wide range, but we might also be impacting just a single symptom. And many of you might have experience trying to do that with, products, that are symptom treatments, not, real Alexander disease treatments. And so as we're finding those opportunities, we then see, and identify them, we can then start seeing if there are either existing or new therapeutic approaches that can have that effect in that disease process. And so, this is, kind of can, happen in terms of repurposing existing products, maybe drugs that are even approved for other diseases or indications. But as medical science and different targeted approaches have really become more mainstream, it's great that we have ways that can really, target specific sites within the body and manipulate even genetic material, things that are relevant for Alexander disease. So once we identify, a promising compound, then we're moving from research really into development. And we're going to talk a little bit about that well-established path with, again, the caveat that, very rare diseases like Alexander disease are the exception to a lot of these rules. So if you go to the next slide. So before we jump into the topic of preclinical development, I just want to orient you to the bottom of the slide. You see that kind of chevron figure there, and you see the different stages of development, preclinical, and then the 3 clinical phases of development, and then an important part, which is where FDA is involved in reviewing all of that data. So we're going to be walking through each of those. In the preclinical phase, this is when we have that product candidate, we have that drug, and we want to see in animals and other bench or laboratory type experiments, is it reasonably safe to use in humans, and is it sufficiently effective against the disease targets, those things, those opportunities that we identify. We want to know not only, kind of is the drug in isolation, but like what doses, of that, active, ingredient or material, is both, reasonably safe and has that targeting, activity. We're already, even before a drug ever goes into a person, trying to find that right balance and narrow into a range of doses that we might want to take into clinical trials. Once this information is gathered, that information then is submitted to the FDA in what's called an investigational new drug application, or IND, and that allows FDA to review and give permission for that investigational drug to be used in clinical trials. Go to the next slide. And so that's when we get to go. The normal approach is we'd be going into phase 1. And even in a disease like Alexander disease, you're going into phase 1. It's just that phase 1 may be seamless into phases 2 and 3 versus being very discrete and sequential studies. So in phase 1, in order to move into that first in human study, FDA is evaluating that IND submission. They're evaluating those non-clinical studies in terms of the effect, which is called pharmacology, for the safety, that's called toxicology. But they're not just looking at that data, they're looking at how the drug's manufactured. They want to make sure it's high quality. You want to make sure that patients are getting the right amount of the active ingredient, that you don't want to overdose or underdose. You want to make sure that there's not harmful impurities that could hurt a patient if it was kind of included as part of the manufacturing process. So FDA is looking at that as well as the clinical trial protocol, the plan for the first in human study that they would like to conduct. If FDA thinks everything's good to go, there's reasonable safety, sufficient justification for the doses, sufficient quality information, then the developer, at this point, it could still be an academic research center. It may be a kind of classic biotech or pharmaceutical company will sponsor their phase 1 clinical trial. In phase 1, this is the early stage development. So you might have heard like of dose escalating or ascending doses, single ascending, multiple ascending. This is all what's done in phase 1. Phase 1, we're starting to start with low doses, work our way up, make sure that, really by emphasizing drug safety, that we're seeing what doses start to, show that there are side effects. No drug is perfectly safe. And so we need to characterize that safety. And so, we're going to see what those most common side effects are. And we also get to see where the drug goes in the body, how long it's there, how long it takes to get out of the body, which gives us a good sense, and maybe even through some, biomarkers, start to see some of the drug activity. But these are very small, usually very small, very short investigations. But if we identify doses that are, again, reasonably safe, we can then take, maybe 1 or 2 active and safe, tolerated doses into phase 2. We go to the next slide. So, as we're moving here, progressing through development, we start to have new goals. We're always still focused on drug safety, but as we move into phase 2, you're starting to think about, can we start, can we kind of prove the concept? Can we start to assess efficacy to ensure that the drug, the doses that we've selected, it's going to actually have the effects that we think that they will have. There might be some effects that are greater than others. We're not so sure yet. Ultimately, so we can identify, what it is that we're going to test, to kind of prove efficacy or the drug's effect or benefit. And so in phase 2, these are typically, somewhat longer studies, somewhat larger, but not the really big phase 3 studies that sometimes you hear about where, which are much longer. We can start to maybe here compare to a placebo or some other type of control group. to try to identify what's drug effect versus what's, the natural, disease progression fluctuations, or, even other, standards of care you might, individuals might receive as part of, the healthcare system. Um, so we're, again, maybe still here looking at multiple different doses to try to see, kind of assess in an interim way the benefit risk profile of the drug. Once we've done that, we can move to phase 3 on the next slide. And here, this is where we're really trying to, test and see, if there, is a real drug effect. The phase 3 study, or the phase 3 portion of a study, is really there to test, this hypothesis of, does the drug have a benefit in the patients it's intended to treat? And so normally these would be larger scale, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. In very prevalent conditions, you actually need multiple of these trials. In rare diseases, it's very common for there just to be a single phase 3 study, or phase 3 portion of a study. And because we're usually, increasing the number of people participating by the time we get to phase 3, and we're evaluating for longer term, treatment in chronic diseases, or lifelong diseases, we're not only looking at how well the drug works, but we're seeing how, is that effect being, sustained over time? Is there durability of effect? Because we have more people, we can start to see maybe in different subgroups, whether that's, sex or age or disease severity at, when they enroll in a study, how well does the drug work better in certain groups? Are there different safety signals in different groups? Obviously, safety is still really important, and by having a somewhat larger group here, even in a setting like Alexander disease, we're going to start picking up some of the less common safety issues, both because there's more people, so you have a better chance of seeing something that might be a rarer side effect, but also from now accruing more experience of people being on drug longer. Some things take a while to show up. And again, no drug is perfectly safe, so it's normal to see these adverse events, these safety risks. And ultimately, the benefits of the drug just have to outweigh those risks. And so that takes us to our next slide, which is really, starting to put this all together. This is a lot of information. It takes many years to go from preclinical, really even discovery through to preclinical and then through development. The great news, as I mentioned, is in very rare diseases, there's more flexibility to condense these into, 1 or 2 studies instead of 3 or 4 studies, or sometimes even more. But ultimately, once we're done, we now need to see, is this enough? Not all studies are as successful as others in testing that hypothesis. And rare disease, we don't always know what the right measures are, and so we're learning as we go. Because there hasn't been, dozens of drugs that have come along before that have helped us figure out, what the right endpoints are, what the right population to include in the study is. And so when we do have all of this information, we need to go to FDA and show it to them. And this is see if we're ready to submit a marketing application. It's called a new drug application, or for a biologic product like a gene therapy, that would be called a biologics license application. And you hold a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. And if you can go back 1 slide. So you're going to have that pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. You're going to say, here's what we've got, kind of at a high level. You can't get into all of the details at this point, but you're going to say, this is what we think is, really like the top line, the most pivotal information. Here's how we analyzed it. And the idea is, to see what in this conversation with FDA, whether there's any major issues. Is there some additional information that's needed? Because you don't want to, you as the developer don't want to have to do all the work of putting together an NDA or BLA if you're not ready yet. And if you're FDA, you don't want to, spend the time reviewing all of this information, and it's a lot of information if you're not ready yet. But let's just assume that that conversation goes well. There aren't these major issues. And so then that NDA or BLA, all of that data, not just the phase 3 part of the data, but everything, all the way back to the preclinical data gets put together, submitted to FDA in that NDA or BLA. So now if we move to the next slide, then it's on FDA to review this data. And so, this is kind of a place where a lot of the times, those of us on the outside, even the drug developer, but also the patient community, we're kind of just watching and waiting. FDA is now rolling up their sleeves, they're doing their work. And so they're going to first look to make sure it's a complete application, at which time they'll actually file the application. And then they really do their substantive review. They're looking to assess whether the drug's effectiveness has been demonstrated. They want to assess what the safety is and then do that benefit risk assessment. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? And I mentioned this at the IND stage, but even here, and even more importantly here, FDA is looking at the quality information about how the drug's manufactured. This drug, they're approving the ability for this drug to be made for any patient that has a prescription for it, which is going to be more than that, the number that were in clinical trials. And so often that manufacturing is being scaled up. And so we want to make sure that, again, that high quality product is getting to patients. As part of this process, the FDA can engage with the public through an advisory committee meeting. This allows them to bring together outside experts to help them assess important scientific issues. And as part of an advisory committee meeting, there's also an opportunity for the public to weigh in and provide comment. These meetings are, as they say, as they're called here, advisory, right? So, they don't, even if an advisory committee votes and makes a recommendation, it's still ultimately FDA's decision, and they don't have to agree with an advisory committee. So if we go to the next slide, so we get through this whole NDA, BLA review period, a drug for Alexander disease would likely get priority review. It's, a 6-month review with that an additional 2 months for FDA to initially see if it's a complete application. So 8-month process, not short, but in the scheme of the overall drug development program, it's a relatively small part. But at the end of the day, if FDA approves the drug, then it's available to be prescribed. But the job of the FDA and the drug developer aren't done. They need to continue to monitor the product while it's on the market, when it's out there being used by a broader range of people with the condition. There might be new safety issues. There might be new other types of information that emerges. And so, that is all captured, and kind of FDA has this, obligation to ensure the benefits of the drug continue to outweigh the risks as that benefit and risk profile evolves over time. Go to the next slide. So I know we've covered a lot in a quick amount of time about how drugs are developed, but we do think it's important to make sure everyone really understands that process, because FDA is helping guide companies through that process from the very beginning, and then of course they're making the approval decision at the end. Let's just talk a little bit more about what FDA's specific role is as part of that process. So we talked a lot about how drugs are developed, and a large part of that being the clinical trials that are conducted. It's important that that FDA does not actually develop the drugs. It's researchers, pharmaceutical companies, even sometimes nonprofit groups take this on. And so it's not FDA that's actually testing the drugs. FDA, they're not running trials. They're not on site during those clinical trials. That's the researchers who are engaged by the drug companies to conduct the clinical trials. And those researchers and the drug companies, they have to go get FDA approval. And so because of that, they also go to get FDA input before starting trials. So FDA has the ability to help influence the design of those trials. But FDA can't require a trial to be conducted. The company doesn't want to conduct it, or develop a drug. That's really in the hands of the drug developer. If you go to the next slide, there's a couple other areas that are kind of very important areas, but are just outside of FDA's purview. So FDA, they don't regulate your doctors, your, other healthcare providers, the practice of medicine. They regulate the drug developer, the drug company, and they regulate the research that goes into developing drugs and then how those companies can market their drugs. We've all seen the ads on TV, those, long lists of adverse events that are listed off, and the people dancing around in flowery fields, that kind of thing. So FDA oversees, what companies can say about the drugs that they have approved. But doctors, they're free to prescribe FDA-approved drugs, within their kind of standard of care, and so they can actually, prescribe drugs for other uses, whether it's, maybe different ages, different conditions, and this is called off-label use, and that's not an area that FDA oversees. So generally, issues related to navigating, finding the right doctors and, the healthcare system generally, that's outside of FDA. They don't have influence over that. So that's something that we don't really focus on. Similarly, FDA is not regulating the price of medicine or whether insurance companies will cover drugs that are approved. Even if they had that type of information, they're not allowed to consider that as part of their legal framework for approving drugs. But they don't have that information anyways, so it's kind of also outside of the scope of thinking about FDA as our audience for this meeting. If you go to the next slide. So I spent a little bit of time saying what FDA doesn't do, but they really do play a really big role in this whole process. And they do as part of their mission. Not only are they there to protect the public health, but they are there to promote the public health. And their reviewers, you can imagine, they've seen, countless drugs developed, every drug, developed in, for use in the United States. But the specific reviewers, in this case, would have seen, any product being developed for Alexander disease. They would be seeing many other, rare and ultra rare disease applications. So they have a good sense of what works, what doesn't work, and they, share that insight through providing kind of technical help to researchers and drug developers who come in and ask them questions and seek their input. FDA, helps, by doing that, companies actually design their trials. So we have the best way of, when a study reads out, we want to know, did we really answer the question of whether the drug works? And so we want to get the design right, because it's possible a clinical trial could read out and not be positive. But that's not because the drug doesn't work. It's because we studied the wrong things. And so we want to try to avoid that. And so because of that, FDA has numerous meetings with companies throughout the drug development process to try to make sure we get it right. Next slide. So again, we covered a lot of information here. We want to make sure everyone has a good sense of FDA and where they fit into that drug development process. If you want more information about FDA, not only their role in the process, but their different programs and activities, there's a great FDA website for patients listed here on the slide. You can go check that out. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah, who's going to talk really about where your voice, fits into that process. And then again, more specifically, what this PFDD meeting is all about.
Thanks so much, James, for that great overview of drug development. And as mentioned earlier, what we are preparing for, the penultimate moment, is an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, or ELPFDD. And so what is the purpose of this meeting? You heard James talk about all the different steps FDA takes to review data and the clinical studies that go into the development of new drugs. And so in that process, FDA realized that there was an important voice that was missing from that process, and that was the voice of people actually living with the condition and their caregivers. So FDA wanted to develop a more systematic way to gather the patient and caregiver perspective about different conditions, especially for rare diseases like Alexander disease, that the FDA might not know that much about. And so this information is really helpful to inform FDA's understanding of a particular disease so that when they're working with drug developers to design a trial, they have a better understanding of the kinds of endpoints and outcomes to measure that are actually important to patients. And this also helps them at the end of the process when drug developers submit all of their data on their investigational drug to the FDA as a part of the marketing application. FDA conducts a benefit risk assessment and decides whether or not to approve the drug. And so I mentioned something called a benefit risk assessment. This is a formal assessment that's done by the FDA for every drug that they are reviewing. And the purpose of it is to really decide whether the benefits of the new treatment outweigh the potential risks or side effects for that condition. And so in order to understand this, FDA needs to analyze what is the disease or condition and what are the current treatments that are available to people living with that condition. For instance, are there other FDA approved treatments, or are people simply treating the symptoms of the disease because there's nothing else available? And how effective are currently available treatments? This kind of information helps FDA to understand the current state of things, including what the unmet medical need is for the community. And then, as far as the benefits of the potential treatment and the potential risks, this is the data that they review from the clinical trials conducted by the drug developers. So, when a company submits all of their data to the FDA evaluates what did those clinical studies show, and what were the potential side effects that were observed with this new treatment. And so these first two things, the analysis of the condition and the current treatment options, that's really where this ELPFDD meeting that we're having is really going to be helpful to the FDA. And so we're talking about an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. And the reason it's called an ELPFDD is because it's externally led by the End Alexander Disease Organization, and that these other ELPFDD meetings that have been held are hosted by other patient organizations. The planning is done external to the FDA. The FDA is supportive of the meeting and has been involved in helping to develop the meeting, but it really is the community's meeting. FDA really just plays a supportive role in these meetings, and they will be there in listening mode. This meeting is really going to be a framework for discussing questions that come from FDA's benefit risk framework. And it really represents the important considerations in the FDA decision-making process. So we've reviewed past meetings and other disease area questions. We've tailored the agenda and panel questions for this meeting to really try and communicate what is the most important information related to Alexander disease. And so FDA's emphasized to us that active patient involvement and participation is really the key to success for these meetings. And that's really why we're having this meeting with you today. And hope you're really excited about it. And people always ask, or at least one question that always comes up is, what's going to come out of this meeting? Well, at the end of the day, there is going to be a report that is called the Voice of the Patient Report that will essentially summarize all of the patient and caregiver and audience testimony that is collected as during the meeting. We are going to have polling questions, so those are going to be analyzed. There will also be written comments, which will be collected as well. as well as those patients and caregivers that call in and speak live during the meeting. All of that input is going to be summarized in this document that then becomes a key communication to FDA review staff, as well as drug developers or anyone who really wants to read it. It will be made publicly available not only on Alexander's website, but also on FDA's website. And so anyone that's interested in Alexander disease and learning about what is most important to patients and caregivers will be able to have access to this report, including and specifically the FDA. It will really inform them about the ways that meaningful treatments for this disease can be developed. And so now we will talk about participating in the meeting. How can you participate? Who is this meeting for? Alexander disease patients and caregivers, of course, FDA staff, pharmaceutical and biotech companies, really anyone interested. It is a public meeting, so family, friends, coworkers, other support people in your network can all attend this meeting. It takes place on December 5th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And the meeting will be virtual, so you can attend from anywhere in the world through the interactive live stream link that is going to be posted on the web page shown on the screen. And so now we'll just spend a few minutes on the agenda and what you should expect on the day of the meeting. So first we start with welcome and introductory comments from End Alexander Disease, as well as a brief presentation from FDA. This is going to be followed by interactive discussions that are going to be divided into two topics. In the morning, we are going to focus on how Alexander disease symptoms affect you or your loved one's life. So, what symptoms do you or your loved one have? Which ones affect you or your loved one the most? We will take a quick lunch break for half an hour, and then when we come back, we are going to shift gears and talk about how do you or your loved one manage Alexander disease. We'll be dealing with questions such as what are your or your loved one's current approaches and current treatments. If there is anything um, from a new treatment in the future, what would you like to see, or what symptoms or aspects of the disease would you like that to treat? The morning and afternoon sessions will each start with a quick presentation by an Alexander disease expert. In the morning, the presentation will provide a clinical overview of the disease, and in the afternoon, there will be an overview of the Alexander disease treatment landscape. After each session, there will be pre-recorded patient panels, and following that, there will be polling questions and a moderated discussion with the audience, which is you. So it's really important that we have as much live participation as possible. We will, at the end of the day, have a summary of the meeting, and then there will be some closing comments. So we wanted to give you an idea of what some of the discussion questions during the meeting are going to be. And so we will start first with the morning topic. So there will be a time during the meeting where we are going to ask you to pick up your phone and call in. The telephone number, it will be easy for you to figure out. It will be at the top of the screen during the live stream, but it's really going to be almost like a talk show. Where you can call in and share some of your experiences that will then get shared during the live program. And so some of the questions for the first topic are, of all of the symptoms of Alexander disease, which 1 to 3 symptoms have the most significant impact on you or your loved one's life? How does the disease affect you or your loved one on best and worst days? And then describe those days. Are there specific activities that are important to you that you or your loved one can't do at all or as fully as you would like because of living with Alexander disease? Other questions that might be asked are, have you or your loved one's symptoms changed over time? And how has the ability to cope with those symptoms changed over time? And that one thing to clarify is when we talk about symptoms, we want to know about physical symptoms as well as psychological and emotional symptoms. And then we'll also ask things like, what do you fear the most as you or your loved one gets older? What do you worry about with your condition as it might change? And what frustrates you the most about having this condition, especially over the long term? And as I said, in the afternoon, we are going to shift gears to talking about challenges with treating Alexander disease. And so some of the questions for that session are going to be, what are you or your loved one currently doing to manage symptoms? What medications are you using? Or other treatments, whether they are approved or unapproved or used off-label. We want to know things like lifestyle modifications, things that may not be typical pharmacological or drug treatments. Those all count as uh, things that we would consider to be treatments. So how well do these treatments treat the most significant symptoms of the disease? And then we also want to hear about the downsides. What are the most significant side effects to current treatments? And how do they affect you or your loved one's daily life? We really want to hear about this because sometimes, even though there's a treatment available, it doesn't mean that it's one curative or that it's even really helping in a big way, or maybe it's really burdensome, or maybe there's terrible side effects, but that you have to push through. And then finally, short of a complete cure, which of course is what everybody would like to see, what are specific things that you would look for in an ideal treatment for Alexander disease? So as you know, if we've got drug companies listening, as well as FDA, we really want to hear from you about what you would like to see in a new treatment coming down the pike. And so our discussion format on the day of the meeting, as I said, there will be a panel of patients and caregivers for each of the 2 topics, the morning topic on symptoms and the afternoon topic on treatments. And so we have 5 people in the morning and 5 people in the afternoon that have prepared pre-recorded statements. And so the purpose of these statements is to really set a foundation for the audience discussion that will follow after these panelist statements are done. After we hear from the panelists and patient and caregiver discussion starters online, there will be a chance to answer polling questions, which can be done directly on the browser on your cell phone, tablet, or computer. And then whenever we do some polling, that we're going to have a live audience contribution, a few people that we bring in live via Zoom. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there will also be a telephone number where you can call in to share. And then James, who you heard from earlier, he is going to ask questions and invite you to submit responses either in writing or preferably live on the phone. We really want as many of you to call in as possible. And so a couple of tips on how to participate effectively on the day of the meeting. First and foremost, we hope that you can join us on the day of the meeting and participate live through the polling questions, calling in and submitting written comments via email, all during the day of during the meeting. Also keep in the back of your mind what James has said about FDA's role and the purpose of the meeting. We're not going to want to talk about insurance, high insurance costs, high prices of medicine, inability to access certain medicines, because FDA doesn't regulate those things in particular. We would suggest reviewing some of the discussion questions in advance, and these will actually be posted on the End Alexander Disease website. So continue to monitor that website. As Jason mentioned in the beginning, there's going to be a lot of information posted on that website between now and the day of the meeting. And so if you have something important to share, we encourage you to share it the day of the meeting, and try and relate it to the most appropriate topic or panel question that we're talking about. And then pick up your phone and call in or write in. And please know that it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience that someone's already voiced, that's similar to your own. Because we want to establish that a lot of people have said some of the same things, so that must be something that's really, really important and something that really impacts people's lives. But if you do have something that's similar to what others have said, give it your own personal or unique perspective. Also try to keep your comments concise and focused. We want to hear from as many voices as possible. And so keeping your comments concise will allow us to hear from a lot of you. And please know that you can always send in written comments after the meeting is over. So even if you can't attend the day of the meeting, you can always submit written comments, which will also be incorporated into the Voice of the Patient report. And so, talking about participating in the discussion, this is a live meeting, so it will be live on webcast. We want you to participate in the polling, calling in with comments, submit written comments, all of the above, whatever you're most comfortable with. Continue to check the website. As I mentioned, the URL is on the slides. There will be a lot of updates between now and the day of the meeting. Eventually, you will be able to register for the meeting at that website as well. So continue to check that web page. That is also where you will be able to submit your written comments. And there will be a time period when that is opened up before the meeting. So you can even submit comments ahead of the meeting. But you will also have up until 30 days after the meeting as well to submit those comments. And again, those will be included in the Voice of the Patient report. And so in summary, this meeting is really the Alexander disease community's opportunity to be a part of the drug development process and to move the process forward and to really make progress towards a treatment for the community. Please know that each and every one of you can have a meaningful impact on clinical trial design as well as drug development. From the very beginning of the process, to try and help companies design trials that better meet your needs, as well as to help the FDA ultimately assess the risks and benefits of future treatments when an application gets submitted, so that they have a fuller understanding of the impact of the disease and to really understand what it's like to live with the condition. So please, I hope you join us on December 5th and help us get the word out to help make a difference. And so with that, I am going to turn it back to Jason for some questions and answers. I don't know if we've received any in the chat. Oh,
Just one so far about panelist selection. And so the question is, have the panels already been selected? The answer to that is yes. It's a process that takes working with our panelists over many weeks and actually months to help them prepare their statements. So those individuals have been selected, but the good news for everybody else in the community, which is most of you, is that the majority of the time during the meeting, set for hearing the patient experience and hearing from patients and caregivers, is the live audience discussion. And so we're very, very eager to hear from you. I'll be moderating the meeting, so I will be very eager to see your names pop up as callers that will be able to be on live and actually share your stories live. And we'll be able to have some, good back and forth discussion to really help us, the world, learn from you. So if you have questions, you can either put them into chat or, if you want to raise your hand and can come off of mute to quickly share your question. We're very happy to answer any questions that you have. I know we've thrown a lot at you tonight already.
Yeah, James and Sarah, I don't see any other questions that have come in. But pardon me, I would like to just, I guess, reiterate something that I think is very important and can't go, said enough. And that is participation of any sense is so important in this process. This hearing from the community is the entire objective. Is the only objective. There aren't decisions being made. It really is a chance for the community to say, we need to be heard. I don't know how else to say it. It doesn't matter about the amount of effort that goes into it. It doesn't matter about the work or anything like that. It just comes down to will we have a representative population calling in and participating in the live polling, participating in the comments. I've had a chance to look at a few, and they're not the like, with all due respect, they're not the most exciting of meetings, but they are so important and they potentially can change lives. And not to be overly dramatic, but I think on behalf of all of the patients, both now and in the future, I'm begging people to participate, even if it is just to vote, off camera and quietly. If it's to submit afterwards, having people review this meeting and being confirmed in the report that follows, to show that of such a small community, such a high percentage of us participate because we are desperate for answers and for treatments and for therapies and for research. It truly is we have one shot to do it, December 5th. And so I would encourage you to do everything possible to rally the troops in your community with your caregivers and your families and your siblings to log in and join and show some support. Do you want to say something quickly?
As a patient with Alexander's disease, I'm been diagnosed when I was 5, and I've been Montreal patient
Just say December.
December 15th,
Fifth.
we appreciate it if you can join. I'll be there too. Thanks.
That was well rehearsed. But I do thank everybody in advance for those that can participate. And James and Sarah, you guys have done a great job. I think it looks like there's one more question that's been submitted, and that's, are there any
That's a good one.
parameters or guidelines? James, do you want to take
Yeah,
that?
so for anyone calling in, writing in, I mean, the main one is if you're a person living with Alexander disease or a parent, a sibling, another family member, close family friend, you are the community, and we want to hear from the community. So that's who we want to participate. In terms of like advice, two things really come to mind for me. One, this is not maybe a typical patient family conference, where you're all coming together to, share the ways that you persevere, and overcome the challenges day to day. Obviously that's an important part of sharing amongst each other, but here we're talking to FDA and drug developers. And so we really need to pull back the curtain and have them really understand what it is to live with Alexander disease and the challenges. They don't know the challenges and the difficulties. They can't help in addressing those. And so, I'd ask that consider, kind of being blunt with us. That's what we want to hear. And then the other is, I know many, and especially in small communities like this, many of you are advocates, in addition to, being personally affected yourself or your loved ones. This is the time to kind of take off your advocate hat. You're not here at the meeting to speak on behalf of the community. You're here to speak and share and really like give us a lens into your life. And so we ask that you speak and share your personal experiences. And by hearing many individual personal experiences, that's going to paint the broad picture of what your whole community goes through. Sarah, anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I think that's great, James. Thank you. And I would just say, given the various ways that you can participate, also do what's most comfortable for you. These are very emotional topics, and as James said, we really want you to be blunt and pull the curtain back. And so, if you're most comfortable doing that in writing, submit a written comment. If you wanna call in, call in. So we really try and give as many options as possible. And if you participate in the meeting and then think of something later, you can always submit a written comment afterwards as well.
All right. Well, we want to be respectful of your time as well. And we really appreciate you sticking with us for a little over the full hour here. So I know, on behalf of Jenny, Jason, all of us behind the scenes, I know I'm excited, just, scrolling down, looking at all these names. I hope I see all of your names when we're together, a month from now. So
Thanks, everyone, and let us know if you have any other questions, if anything comes up.